Many thanks for joining us. This is our third session on the series of GSD live interviews, Talking Architecture. And this is the last one of this first season. So the team has crafted a set of 7 questions for Rural Studios Director Andrew Freear. And Andrew, glad you joined us today. With the team, we believe that it's fascinating to speculate about a design build program like yours in a pure Beaux-Arts setting like Harvard GSD. The very thing that Samuel Mockbee and D.K. Ruth were trying to escape when founding the studio in Auburn University back in 1993. Embracing this paradox, we want to discuss with Andrew the typological, urban, and metropolitan implications of his organization. Is it very intriguing to see where the Rural Studio is heading, its future evolution? So Tara, it's your moment.
Hi, Andrew. I'm Tara. I'm a Master of Architecture 1 student in my 3rd year. I'll just go ahead and ask my question, which is about learning from the trailer. In order to be efficient in providing good housing solutions for the people of Hale County, Alabama, you've deliberately decided to avoid considering local architectural styles in your projects like the 20K house or the front porch initiative. However, the flexibility and mobility of trailer architecture has its advantages. Is there anything to learn from the trailer that can still be used in your upcoming Newburn projects?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Probably to start, I might take a little bit of issue with your characterization. I don't think we've deliberately tried to avoid considering local architectural styles. And in fact, I think actually we really wanted it, the 20K house, or when we were calling them the 20K houses, to be quite populist and not just sort of for architects, right? We had for a number of years been doing a client-based house that was very idiosyncratic, and really realized that we actually had an opportunity to do something iterative and learn from one house after the other. We built with wood because we live in a forest. We looked at the homes around us that had lasted 120 years and been around for 120 or 150 years. The antebellum homes that, obviously were built under dubious circumstances and constructed off the back of slavery. But there were a lot of things for us to see and learn from, big roofs, big overhanging roofs for cross ventilation, lift the buildings off the ground. Porches were important to create shaded spaces around the building to bring cooler air into the spaces. For us, we very much looked at the local vernacular and built on it. And actually the act of building in wood meant that it was always going to be restricted by the kind of the capacity of wood to do what it could do. I think all of those things really that we're aiming for, trailers really don't do. Probably the only thing they do relative to that is that they're lifted off the ground. So what's good about the trailers? I don't know. I mean, in doing what we were doing, we tried not to sort of offer it up as an alternative to the trailer. Sorry, not a replacement to the trailer, but simply an alternative, because it's really hard to beat a home that you can go and pick your home. I can go into the parking lot today, I can pick the home that I want, and then I can get it delivered tomorrow. So architects can't beat that kind of expeditious delivery process. The one thing that I have observed out here in the kind of rural kind of housing is a lot of any housing development that's done out here through architecturally or kind of quote through planning processes ends up being very what my wife would call sub-rural. So it essentially takes suburbia and it plonks it in a rural location. And I think the interesting thing with a trailer is that it's movable, right? You can tow it down a road, down a street, and actually at the end of the day, the truck driver pulling the trailer ends up being the planner and the designer, and he'll actually make the space. And oddly enough, it's actually, I think, contributed to just about the best rural spaces that we have today. They learn to configure these trailers generally in kind of circles or semicircles. So they understand the idea of having something in the center, right? These homes, they often will kind of be in proximity to each other so you can have spaces between the buildings that are quite smart. So intuitively, people position buildings front to the street, and then try to make public spaces in front of them. And of course, that's all driven kind of by the turning radius of the trailer and the truck. So I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's a really good way of not only the informal settlement, but the kinship network of families. So fairly quickly, you can build family groups around each other that otherwise wouldn't happen. And you can improvise with the position of these things on pieces of property that are suddenly quite tight. So from a kind of a planning, I don't want to say urban planning point of view, but from a kind of building community, I think they're actually quite good. They're certainly better than the kind of formal sub-rural developments that are superimposed on it. I don't have a better good thing to say about trailers than that, right? The fact you can move them. But apart from that, they're shit. They're not a long-term investment. They're built poorly. I can go on, right?
No, that's okay. I mean, that's a very valid statement, and it's something, I've seen your own analyses of trailers, and I've also been reading online, what are the pros and cons. My next question is really about, like, the issue with the trailers. Is that something that you identified yourself and you were like, you guys, this is not helping you? Or were people in the community starting to realize, like, maybe I made a bit of a bad investment here?
I mean, 25 years ago when I showed up out here, there was still the stereotypical shacks on dirt floors, right? The good thing about those shacks on dirt floors is that they actually disintegrated into the ground. The trailer will disintegrate, but then leave this kind of ugly chassis. And our landscape is kind of cluttered with ugly chassis and metal stud walls with insulation sticking out of it. So they don't get taken back into nature particularly well. I mean, the encouraging thing about trailers is that people will intuitively build porches on them. That's actually the most beautiful thing about trailers, is that people will add to them and actually even encapsulate them. So you end up, oddly enough, starting out with a kernel of a house that often they'll build around and almost completely enclose. The sad thing is that the original thing itself is so fragile. If it could be a starter home instead of the trailer, it would be much better, because again, the trailer doesn't have a solid foundation. But I think this was us simply saying there needs to be an alternative for them. The demand for trailers is plentiful. It's very successful. It's really hard to beat it. I can get it instantaneously, and I can get the bath set up with the gold lame taps and my dream bath and all of that shit that ticks all of the boxes. But within 15 years, the roof will have deteriorated and fallen in. So, yeah.
That's okay. It was an excellent answer. Thank you so much.
Hi, Andrew. This is Zhao. And I was working on this question with Anna Laureate,
Hello,
who is currently in Newport.
So our question is about flexibility in the private home. Rural Studios work acknowledges the idea of additions, expansions, and adaptations of the house from the users.
We did some research and we find the idea of flexibility has gone through several iterations during the past 2 decades in the Rural Studio. It ranges from the open structure strategy in Patrick House in 2004, where a steel structure created the framework for inexpensive materials to fill in, to the strategy of under a big roof in a study of 100-year home, which integrates an expandable L-shaped porch into pole barn structures.
So in the most recent 20K project, Myers Home, the strategy is to combine a protected shell and a core to allow interiorized expansions. How does this reflect Rural Studios' current criteria on flexibility for the house? What is expected from the user, and which reactions have you experienced in previous projects which have led you to this position?
Great question. Fundamentally, this was all our own self-critique. I think we realized that we were being very prescriptive about spaces, having a quite middle-class white overlay of how folks were living. We were also concerned that, frankly, the sort of African-American history of making do and adapting with what was there was something that we wanted to kind of more clearly understand. So more recently, we've tried to look at our houses and start to design our houses really with spaces without names, or with spaces that could have multiple names. A bedroom that could become a living room, a bedroom that could become an office that could become a dining room, you name it, right? And allow folks to inhabit the way that they want to inhabit it. And also try to make bigger spaces with fewer partitions, or the spaces with opportunities where people could build partitions because of the great American do-it-yourself thing, right? You all want to build stuff. So, and they're not afraid to. More recently, what we've witnessed is a need in these homes, them to be able to adapt, particularly to extended families, to many generations of folks living in the homes. So spaces like home working spaces or office spaces that could also become a half bed for, again, the kinship network where somebody needed a place to sleep. The other thing that we've also started to understand is that rural housing has to be treated very differently to urban housing. Rural housing is not something that is going to be a wealth maker. Land for housing is not valuable. So homes do not, you cannot buy a house to flip it. So we're really looking at houses as being, when we call it the 100-year home, I think we consider them, we're trying to see them as life builders. So and offering up people envelopes that they can inhabit and change, particularly internally, or add to without damaging the existing house. Because one of the real problems here is that often people will build a very small house and then add on and then add on. And every time they add on, they undermine the thing that they built in the first place. The connection is the weakest point. It's always where these houses fail. So that image that you showed, we're looking at a 2-story 20K house, or what we call 20K, ground floor completely open. So we start off with that, right? A big volume with a core in it that includes the kitchen and the bathroom. Then the space around it on the ground floor that we offer up to the client a series of options. So they could have a couple of bedrooms and have a long living space, or a couple of bedrooms on one side and do an L-shaped living space. So we build the shell first, which is the top one, and then we get our clients to come in and tell them where they'd like to put the bedrooms, and we can mock up the walls, so we give them an opportunity. The other thing is we give them a staircase access to a second floor, and this is nothing new, right? Sears House was doing this. It's like, none of this is particularly groundbreaking, but it gives them an opportunity to expand inside a shell that they don't destroy. So protect the shell, encourage them not to expand outside the shell, but to give them some opportunities inside. The other option that we're looking at, frankly, is building a big roof and letting them build objects underneath it. So you give them the infrastructure of a slab. This is if you go on the website, it's called Reggie's house, Preacher's house. You build a big volume, and I'm pouring foundations for it this afternoon. Or build a big slab as big as you can afford, a big roof, and let them build objects underneath it, and encourage them not to touch the structure and not to touch the roof. So the protection is always there, and they've got a big outside space to which to build in. And so this is our answer to kind of the way that rural housing evolves and our kind of current thinking. But it is offering people flexibility and adaptability, but not necessarily talking about, we're going to give you this object that you hope will gain in value and I can flip in a few years. Sorry.
I find the plan of the Meyer house is very elegant.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's going to be a nice house now.
So this flexibility strategy also has different takes of the porch design. It also reminds me you have this project called the Front Porch Initiative. And right. We're wondering, how does this initiative help the private house to establish their relationship to the community and to shape their identity at large?
The Front Porch Initiative is actually the external face of our internal research. For us, it's exciting because We desperately yearn for feedback. What we do with our local clients is we simply watch the way they live in the houses, right? They're not particularly articulate about the good things or bad things about them. But we've got seven or eight partners across the Southeast who are actually now building these houses in different communities. And they're building them with community development organizations and different builders. And the exchange that we get is going to be feedback on our communication package to build these homes quickly and affordably and build them well, and then get feedback from the occupants. So for us, it's a kind of it's a feedback loop that we desperately need to inform what we're doing. A problem with the 20K name was that it was a nickname inside the studio to challenge us to kind of do the most affordable, best value money for money house that the poorest of the poor could afford. The problem with naming it after a dollar figure is, one, that we can no longer tell you we can do it for $20,000. Material at the moment means I can only build one of these houses for $40,000 in material. But the other thing is it overemphasizes the fact that it's all about the dollars, and it's not. It was a nickname that we had to reel back in, and front porch name simply became it was a name that we were looking for to make the home feel more aspirational and be about the porch, which we think is from a kind of communality point of view and relational point of view, really important aspect of our homes. It's about healthy living, right?
Andrew. So I'm Chris. My question kind of comes on the back of that answer, I guess, this idea that builders build their own homes and that people in general have this kind of do-it-yourself attitude, right? We've been dancing around this question. So my formal question is, permeating the rural environments of Alabama are vernacular architectural creations of formally trained architects. In many other cities, these informal builders' buildings often create a cohesive language that reflects not only the place, but kind of, as you were saying before, the practical applications of everyday people. So in the propagation of rural studios projects around Greensboro and beyond, have individuals or builders signaled influence from rural studios projects?
You want the truth. The truth is not really. The trailer home is so powerful. The individual home building that's done around here is for the relatively wealthy. The trailer home is like going and buying McDonald's lunch. I can buy a McDonald's lunch cheaper than I can buy food in the supermarket. So what the hell am I going to go and buy, right? It's a losing battle. I was invited to take the Loeb Fellowship a few years ago. And in the middle of all of that, Fannie Mae actually called us up. One of my adventures at the Loeb was to try and find funding and to kind of really give the 20K some legs. Fannie Mae essentially is in charge of the mortgage fund in the United States. It's essentially a sum of money that's, like $3 trillion, right? Something in that region. I was baffled that they called us up. I was even more baffled when they sent their 3 CEOs down to Newbern, each of them earning $2 million. They sent their security guards with them and brought their entourage. And we all had lunch in Newbern Mercantile, where the average, income is about $12,000 a year. So they came, and remarkably enough, they were interested in our model homes because they have mortgages, but there's no product for their mortgages in the rural condition. And ironically enough, us, a bunch of undergraduates in the middle of nowhere, were the only folks that were trying to establish some affordable model housing for rural areas. Kind of the relationship has been good enough that Fannie Mae has been a fantastic connector for us all, really has started to help us build relationships across the Southeast. I think they're interested in us because our end product is to actually build something, which is not always great, because you don't always want to say, well, the result has to be built. But oftentimes folks like Fannie Mae will go to a place, have a conversation, and everybody will agree. And then 5 years later, nothing happens. Well, guess what? We're building homes, and we're building homes with some community partners. And some of those homes look like shitty as hell, and some of them look really good, but we're trying to learn about this process. So we've taken our head and lifted it above the radar. We're out of Newbern, we're out of Greensboro, and we're really excited about it. It's a huge challenge because the problem of rural housing is nothing to do with the house. It's all about access. we can point to these issues, insecurities at many levels, health, education, jobs, yada, yada, yada. Just having a good housing model is only a little bit of the problem, right?
As a follow-up to that, have you ever experienced, I guess, any negative feedback from the community about the buildings that you've built?
One of the things that you're always anxious about is in any town building small homes next to big homes, because the last thing you want to do is reduce the value of the house next door, right? So there's been a little bit of that, and we're very much aware of that. And that's all to do with zoning and acceptance, etc. Can we build 3 homes on this lot? We'd rather build 3 homes than one little bitty home. And that's also to do with kind of adroit use of land, right? I built this fucking wonderful planet, and we're doing our damnedest to screw it all up. You want people to help folks live within their means, not patronize them, but help them live within the means. And living small in a rural conditions, not actually that fashionable. You'll live in these small dinky spaces. The tiny house wants us to live, on the thing the size of a desk. Normal people don't want that shit. They want some space, right? They want some space for their 3 big sofas. So how do we work with that market, but also help them live in the means? It's really tough because the pressure's always on to make the houses bigger. The builder wants to make them bigger. The real estate wants to make them bigger. Enough foul language, Diego? Okay. And then the one kickback we did in the early days of it, we used galvanized material on the outside of a couple of our houses. And there was a kind of a storm in the teacup. Somebody wrote a letter to the local paper. And I think people made much more of it than it actually was. But they couldn't really describe what their objection was. Was it too kind of urban or too factory-like? Or was it too rural, vernacular farm building-like? They couldn't really describe it. Anyway, so you come back and you replace it out and you do the same tin with a white coat on it, and it's all right. Nobody says anything about it. So it's like bullshit, right? I'll go to so many people's homes here where, like me, you live in one little space like this, and the rest of it are just rooms that are full of shit. And you're spending money heating and cooling it. To encourage people to live small is just really tough. But it's rural, so you expect to do that, There was one lovely lady who recently died. She was a cotton blossom queen, and she ended up marrying a TWA pilot and went off to New York City and became famous, and then came back to Hale County. She had this beautiful farm, and she came up to me one day and she said, Andrew, I love your little houses, but why do they all look like little slave shacks? So you're like, oh shit. The truth of the matter is we do these little houses that are all based on timber, and there's only kind of so many ways that you can configure timber to build small affordable housing. So if they look like a shotgun house, it's actually because they make a lot of sense material wise, ventilation wise, etc. It wasn't a deliberate vernacular move. Let's build a shotgun house so everybody feels like they live in a slave shack, for goodness. So it's tough, You try to do things and then somebody will shoot you down, have a go at you,
Good morning, Andrew. Our team is composed by Gabriel Redding, Canadian, radicated in New Jersey, Jack Shen, South African, living in California, and myself from Puerto Rico.
Oh, it's confused as hell. As confused as I am.
So you have been successful in your work with the rural communities in Alabama, and have also had a career in large cities like in Chicago or London. So we wanted to ask you, do you imagine a way in which the methodologies used in Rural Studio could apply to these metropolitan projects by your organization as well as by other practices?
I've always been interested in doing the work that nobody else is doing or nobody else perhaps considers as architecture. In Hale County, we never set out to do public projects. Mockbee came out here looking to kind of challenge the ivory tower and the academy and get folks hands-on experience and face-to-face with people. So he found a place where he could help with some housing with some folks that have fallen off the radar. We're doing things that nobody else is doing. So we've sort of been opportunists. Somebody else was doing it who wouldn't do it, frankly. And so we figured out a way to do it. There are folks like Steve Bodaines, and a guy I call the kind of godfather of design build. He was with the Jersey Devils. He runs a program in Seattle. They're very much doing the kind of the in-between spaces. It's either the spaces that kind of get forgotten, so spaces that designers like us turn our noses up at because they're too complicated and they're too fucking messy. And he encourages people to imagine how to deal with that, right? And what to do with those conditions, whether it's under a highway bridge or in the spaces between buildings. He's helped out all sorts of organizations, from community gardens to taken on projects that nobody else thinks is architecture. Because, at Harvard, we all think architecture is just designing museums, apparently. I don't think it is. I think there's much more to architecture than that. And the opportunities for architecture exist everywhere. So you've got to be careful about architecture with a capital A. I'm from a school here, it really is, we train architects, and we're all going to be architects, and we're all going to be heroes, right? So we have to be careful about that. A lot of the things we do is try to kind of take the mundane and give it a little something. So, Lions Park, we spent 10 years designing a park bit by bit, just in building a chain link backstop for the park. We made some architecture out of that and rethought the way that chain link could be hung, and I think made a really beautiful celebratory structure. It's taking those opportunities. We have an opportunity here in some respects from an academic point of view because there's no layers of bureaucracy in the planning out here. I can talk to the mayor on the phone. I can get decisions made with the city council. So from an academic point of view, the speed of decision making is very quick here, very fast here. You don't have that in cities. That's where I think if you want to have do the kind of work we do in cities, you have to sort of look, under the radar or in between, or at the in-between spaces, the kind of detritus spaces.
And I wanted to follow up with a quick question. If you imagine a parallel student project being possible at a university in a larger city, say in the East Coast or something?
Well, I mean, again, I think those projects are out there. I mean, a few years ago, I was in a place in Bergen in Norway. They actually had a kind of a strange design build program where there was the kind of classic thing of the university sends students off to Africa or Southern Asia, and they do something. They drop their thing, they do the work, and then they leave. They're kind of helicoptering and out of it. You never really find out whether or not it worked in that condition. It's like Norman Foster doing something in Hong Kong. How do you know it worked? So Bergen, one of the things that they were doing with their city was that the School of Architecture and their kind of version of the Royal Studio was doing public interventions that were allowed by the city as temporary interventions to test ideas. Like test a bridge connecting two pedestrian routes to each other, and they were done under the guise of being temporary. And then lo and behold, they became so popular that actually the municipality was able to turn them into permanent in pieces, right? So I thought that was really interesting and really inventive, and actually a role for folks like us, where you can test some things and it might fail, but you're making it safe. People can use it, and then people go, oh, this is a great idea. So I really like that. They were also progressive enough that they actually took a part of their city and had a moratorium on the building regulations and threw everything up in the air. And there's various places like that. But I think we should all be provoking the status quo. Our academic program, I hope, asks questions about how we're all taught architecture, and also says, what is architecture, right? I think our kids, I hope, walk away from this going, what do I want to do with my life, and how would I like to be,
Well, hello, Andrew, and thank you for being with us today. So basically, the question is about design build versus and Beaux-Arts. Rural Studio seems to be a unique and experimental program embedded in a somewhat conventional institution from the outside. We wonder, how does Rural Studio situate itself within the the past, present, and future of Auburn University's School of Architecture's pedagogy. It is one of the nation's oldest schools and may be fundamentally influenced by the core ideas of the Beaux-Arts École, the rigid hierarchy of students and professors that thrives on competition and drawing. Was Rural Studio a total disruption into Auburn's tradition of teaching architecture?
I don't think so at all. My bosses actually today would claim that we're sort of the pointed end of the stick of the kind of work that the institution wants to do. Place-based, focusing on regional issues, local issues. Our school actually has a very great and long tradition of makers and visionary makers. There was a guy prior to Mockbee called Bob Faust, who was a disciple and a pupil of Bruce Goff, and he built a number of beautiful homes in and around and buildings in and around Auburn, where students were actually involved with Bob and building these homes. So they were the draftsmen on the homes, and they got involved in building the homes. You know, Mockbee's reaction also to the school was in part sort of annoyance at the ivory tower, the kind of closeted nature of the ivory tower, in the inevitability of kind of campus life a little bit. You have your own silo. So he wanted to get folks face to face with ordinary people and real challenges. And one of the things he actually recognized that was every year, our school is very good at getting students to make full-size mock-ups of details. We and he would see all of these mock-ups going into the dumpster at the end of the year. And part of his challenge was, you know, wouldn't it be nice if actually all these mock-ups make sense and you could connect them all together, and lo and behold, you might actually give somebody a house. So the origins of that very first house, the Harebell house, was essentially a kind of, you know, you students could actually pay for this through the mock-ups that you make, just accumulate all of those mock-ups and do a house instead of doing the mock-up, right? I think we are very much part of the philosophy of the place. Certainly there was some resentment of the place at its beginning, the kind of notoriety that the place got. The place-based, team-based, real project scenario learning, hands-on, is very much part of the culture of the studio. The other question, I think, is this rigid hierarchy. Well, you know, I've just come from a building site this morning, and all of our projects are team projects. We have, in the higher level students, we have teams of 4. I'm simply, I'm a teammate in that project. The students take ownership of the project. They manage the project. They run the meetings with consultants. They budget their project. And I simply have a few more gray hairs than they do. So I very rarely do I throw grenades or tell them they can't do stuff. I'll come back like a dog with a bone and tell them, you've got to fucking think about this, and again and again and again. I've only got a little bit more experience. I've not done a house like this before, right? I haven't done a Boys and Girls Club before. I haven't done a building in Uniontown. It's how I keep fresh, and it's how the work, I think these folks take ownership of it, and that we give them a lot of agency. I kind of breed monsters, frankly. It's pretty flat. I very rarely have to throw a flag on things because of the intensity of the questions. And everybody wants to do the right thing. You don't want to build a home for folks that's going to leak. The discipline of that human relationship and the consequences is really important, right? It's very flat out here, probably annoyingly flat. Somebody always wants to just tell us what the fuck to do, you know. And I'm like, well, no, you gotta figure this out. So
Thank you so much.
Hi, Andrew. Noi here.
Sorry, Noi, I'm losing my connection. I can't hear you on this one. This is a tough one.
That's all right. I'm asking this question with my partner, Shane. Our question is as follows. We stand in a moment where higher educational institutions are held accountable by students demanding equity and anti-racist practices in spaces which hold embedded systemic racism. Rural Studio emphasizes equitable design within the education of citizen architects through outreach and research. Auburn is a historically predominantly white institution. How have the Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate movements bolstered the will for even more change in the university's architectural curriculum?
It's a good question. You know, everybody wants answers on that. And the truth of the matter is it's all tough, right? At the university level, none of us are particularly proud of its history. And I think like all universities, it's in a challenging spot at the moment, your university being one of them, right? And so I think as far as I understand, the university as a whole is trying to work on the appropriate language and the tools to bring a more diverse body. I don't know that I can say any more than that. The desire is there to do that. So at least that's the noise that they make. The architecture program itself is really trying to take a stance of its own, looking at the faculty, the students, and the courses. We've got a core group of folks that's working on coursework and looking and vetting readings for the different year levels for topics that are kind of based on inclusivity and subjects that are kind of different to the kind of very Eurocentric education that a lot of us have got. And it's only when you sit back and reflect on it, and I'm a Brit, just how Eurocentric our education is, right? That's one small thing that we're doing. We are looking actively for ways to get more BIPOC students and faculty. The truth of the matter is it's probably easier with students and much more difficult with faculty because frankly, there are fewer faculty available to us to do that. And with Auburn's reputation, there's not many folks out there probably even willing to come and live in Alabama, right? Alabama's a big deal, right? For a person of color to come work in Alabama. So we're trying. We've sort of stated that we're going to do all that we can, whatever the hell that means, right? Including not having so many, gray-haired old white farts like me around. So replacing those. But at Rural Studio, I mean, it's easy for me to say that, but I would hope that we can be respected for our decades of listening and our partnership out here. That actually can be judged more than the kind of PR of all of our projects and products that are kind of out there in the world. Because we have worked really hard for 30 years. I live here. I live in a community that really struggles. And honestly, I think in this such an under-resourced place, I think that you really do see how the weight of the world lays heaviest on the Black folks. I'll be frank with you. And it's hard to know what to do about it, right, as a human being. I'd like to think that our actions speak louder than words and that we're a good neighbor, that we listen, that we're willing to learn from our mistakes. That's the best I can do. I don't know if that at all answers your question. We're trying, right? For us, just being here and trying to be humble about it and, reflecting on our mistakes, understanding the place, being immersed is a way. It's a tough question. Right? It's a tough question for everybody.
You're a British architect and you're operating an estate in Alabama. But as a professor, you say that like actions speak louder than words. But myself as a student, sometimes words could speak louder than action. How do you attempt to educate young American designers and international designers like myself to use architecture in dismantling those systems of oppression?
Out here, I'm taller than everybody. I'm not just white, but I'm bigger than everyone else here. So I have a silly accent that everybody loves and finds sexy, thankfully. So I can swear and say naughty words, and everybody goes, he's English. But laughing at yourself and having humility, I always, when I make fun of, if I try to make fun, first and foremost, I'll make fun of myself. So I would like to think our students are sort of beaten over the head from day one with just come and look and listen. You ain't going to change the world out here. If you come here, leave it just a little bit better than you found it, and whatever the hell we mean by that. And don't try to patronize people. Don't try to tell people how they should live their lives. When we were invited a few years ago to do the Venice Biennale, we sort of tipped it on its head and said, how do we, it's sort of quasi-colonial. You're going to go to Venice and you're going to do something in somebody else's city. So we wanted to give that as an example, how we would operate somewhere else. We spent a week in Venice, and it's not long enough, of course, it's never long enough, but we found 3 community organizations that were really doing some great work. And we decided to ask them what they needed. And they gave us a list of the things that they both, one was involved with the homeless and the other was involved in renovating affordable housing. And they were actually renovating public housing that the municipality wasn't renovating. So they were going in, squatting in these homes, renovating them. And the program became so successful, the city started supporting it. Bizarre. So we got a list from them of material that they needed, and we turned our entire exhibit into the material that they needed. We made a theatre out of the material, and we made 4 movies, 3 about the work we do, and then 4 the last one publicizing their work. So we didn't go there as an outsider and try to solve their problems through the hours of an outsider. We went there and said, who's the best people that we think might know the issues here that we could help with? And that's always the key. It's like being here. I've been here 20 odd years, and I'm still figuring out how to help, right? You know, do you run it through the municipalities? Do you work with the local community organizations? Who's going to help do something that you know is going to have the most traction and help the most people? And that takes a long time. Flying in, flying out didn't do any of that. So if you're going to go somewhere, my best recommendation is just kind of be there and listen and learn. And that's probably the least patronizing way of, it's been my mode of operation. You know, take the work really seriously, but don't take yourselves too seriously. I dress up as a nun regularly. That's what I do.
Thank you for your response.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for being here.
Hey.
My name is Selwyn, and my question is about the legacy of labor. So as the leader of a design build program, it is no surprise that you like to get your hands dirty. Your bio even says that you love pouring concrete and installing metal roofs. Pedagogically, the experience of physically constructing a building helps architects command techniques in a way traditional, professional construction management simply cannot. Since students are the legacy of the school, we would like to know how alumni have taken the tenets of the Rural Studio into practice, corporate and nonprofit. Has Mockbee's proverbial snakebite yet infected practice, at least in Alabama? This question is most specifically in relation to students as young alumni, you know, as they come out of school and they're dealing with the student debt crisis. How do you help them to focus on foregrounding architecture as a social practice?
You know, everybody's got to figure out how they want to lead their lives. I hope what we do here, I give folks the joy and the opportunity to put something together, right? Give them an opportunity to kind of understand what it is to do something well, how difficult it is to do something well, and kind of demystify that process. And for me, that process is it's what gets me up every day. It's a beautiful process, not just drawing it, but realizing it and putting it together. So in doing that, I think, you know, the studio indirectly challenges our profession, as I've said before, both in the way that we're educating ourselves and the way that we're building and making. So I think our students walk away from here pretty restless, actually, because we really ask them to think about what they want to contribute and how they want to practice. For me, the joy is that they'll end up as fabricators and makers. We've got folks in Birmingham that are fabricating pieces of furniture, steel work for folks both in the South and in New York City. And at the other end of the scale, I've got a student who's working with NASA, looking at the evolution of cities from space. So their gambit of kind of thinking about the world and what they're going to do is really broad. The other thing I'm very pleased about is that a lot of them get involved with the AIA and the professional organizations to try and make those organizations accountable. Because a lot of those, the AIA, for example, it's more about business than it is a passion, right? You go to, you know, AIA conventions and it's all about the nuts and bolts of business. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't know that you all go into this world to kind of just be a business. I mean, I think it's a desire and a need and a want. They're all over the place. I've got folks in affordable housing. I've got folks teaching. They're really dispersed all over the place. We do have groups that kind of have a kinship. There's sort of a kinship network in Atlanta, in Birmingham, in Chicago and Seattle. And they're having an impact in their own way. And a lot of folks are just in normal offices, but I think in normal offices, they rise quite quickly because they've had an experience of taking a project from design to completion. So they know the kind of the tripwires, they know who they need to ask, they know who they need to talk to. I think they walk away with a great deal of confidence, probably far too much confidence. As I said before, Mockbee's cry to the world was that let's not be the folks that take the kind of the crumbs that fall off the table. Let's make the world a better place. Let the planners were discredited in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So if there's anybody that's going to dream about a better world, about a better urban environment, who is it going to be apart from us? So there's many ways to kind of transmit that passion. But I think thinking about, you know, I don't know why you all are at School of Architecture. Why are you at School of Architecture? Is it just for fucking you? Or is it to make the world a better place? In Europe, you get a free education because education is understood to contribute to society. In the United States, we have to pay for it individually because it's all about us as individuals. That's a fucking problem. Society is much more important than us as single individuals. You have a great opportunity as a young architect to make a mark on the world and say, no, we shouldn't build this building. We shouldn't build this building this way, right? We might even not want to build this building at all. But if we aren't doing it, I don't know who the hell is going to do it. And I hope that's one of the lessons that they take away from the Rural Studio. It's like, it is such a privilege to make a mark on this planet. And we've done such a bang up job of fucking it up so far that we need to be a voice. You all need to be a voice, right?
I have one last follow-up that's following up on Shane and Noy's question. And we were wondering what the current relationship between the Rural Studio and the Auburn School of Architecture, which is a predominantly white institution, and the relationship that they have with Tuskegee University, which is a historically Black college, what that relationship is right now and what it could be. And then as a follow-up to my question, with this legacy of labor, if you could dictate what the legacy of the Rural Studio itself would be in 50 years on practice, nationally and internationally.
You know, everybody deserves good design. I mean, rich or poor, I think everybody deserves good design, a house that you could live in that'll keep you warm and dry. That should be a basic human right, and design should be part. That is design in my view. So people were to say that they were the champion of that, I would love that. Good design shouldn't be just for the rich and the wealthy and the entitled. It should be for everybody. We should demand that. You know, Jim Stockhouse gone, but he'll back me up on that. Tuskegee, it's a two-way street. We've worked with Tuskegee on and off. It's a strange dynamic for us. At the end of the day, you know, we all build our relationships personally. So I'm not one to try and force something. Our institution would love to work with the School of Architecture. It needs to be a two-way street. So far, it hasn't happened, and I don't know why. So, and I'm sorry. It is profoundly shocking to go to the two towns and see how wealthy and how white Auburn is and how poor and how Black Tuskegee is. And that brings me great sadness, no great joy at all. Maybe I'll kick my ass and get my own ass and go down there and try and make some noise. I just need to find the right person to talk to that wants to make some noise with me.
It's great to have those thoughts from you, Andrew. And
they were great questions. You know, be careful of the debt. If you get a lot of debt, you can't make choices about your future. You'll end up working for some arsehole that can pay you. Please be careful of the debt. You need to be able to make choices that can allow you to live and work the way that you want it and change the fucking world, right?